what Terrence said. If you don't take anything else away from here today, nothing else away, the only thing you should remember is that the government is by the consent of the people. I'll repeat that. The government is by the consent of the people. I'll say it one more time. Government by consent of the people. That means us. It doesn't mean Obama. It doesn't mean Congress. It doesn't mean the judiciary. It means any of the thousands of bureaucrats out there. It's us, the people. And what we need to do is to start to reassert ourselves and to start giving them better directions as to how we want this country to go. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, I'm not going to keep you too long because I don't want you to do a Biden on me.
We're standing.
I want to talk a little bit about the hundreds and the way government has gotten to where it is now, the behemoth it is today. And this didn't start many years, okay? Hundred years went by when we didn't have big government. Government was still small and the states were still really more or less in power. And starting around the turn of the century and into the 1910s and the early 1920s, there was such a thing that was called progressivism, and it took hold. And it started out with Wilson, and it just kept going from there, with FDR and the Johnson and the Great Society, and through the 60s, through the 70s. And the office of the presidency, which is supposed to not have any powers to regulate, to create laws, has created all of these czars and bureaucracies and commissions. And I just want to go over a list of a few of them. First, education. This is where some places where I think we can just get rid of it. Maybe not the whole thing, but get rid of a lot of it and really cut back. Education subsidies, okay? The Department of Education. If you woke up tomorrow morning and there was no federal Department of Education, how would that impact your life?
It wouldn't.
Would that impact you? I don't think so. Okay, in the 60s it was decided we needed this huge Department of Education. We don't need it. The government, the schools should be regulated and overseen by state, local, and private citizens. That's parents, not the federal government. Nowhere in the Constitution does it authorize a federal oversight of education. Farm subsidies, okay? This is where they don't help small farmers. They pay the big corporations. They pay them to not grow things, okay? And what it is basically destructive corporate welfare. They should get rid of all the farm subsidies. That's the USDA. Okay, next we have the Transportation Department, and their alphabet is the DOT, the Department of Transportation, which, believe me, we see a lot of it right here in Gardiner. And then Amtrak, that wonderful transportation method is just a big money track. Okay, it's fun to ride, but every time you do, it doesn't just cost you the price of the ticket, believe me. The Fed should not be funding local and state projects. These are not the role of the federal government. All it is pork barrel spending, excess bureaucracy, and costly one-size-fits-all government. Okay, the next on my list is one of my favorites, HUD, housing. The federal interference in housing has concentrated poverty and federal urban blight. Everywhere they are, it's destruction. I've seen it where I used to live in Troy. We were up there this Christmas and I just about cried. It's absolutely devastating. It looks like a war zone there. And then our other friends, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, those wonderful institutions that have basically been the cause and stoked the financial crisis. The Fed should get out of the housing business altogether. And I'm going to add one more thing. They should get out of the nursing home business, because I was up in Kingston a couple of weeks ago talking about that. That's the county, but it's still the government. They should get out of the housing business and all nursing home, health care, and everything. Next is energy. The DOE, Department of Energy. Those are the people that fuel corporate cronyism and failed, quote, investments. And every time you hear the word investment out of the lips of a politician, it means spending. So what I like to do is every time, it's like a little game. Every time Obama in his speech says investment, I immediately say spend. So he says investment, I say spend, and it's just a little test like that. Healthcare, that's the big one. Health and Human Services, those lovely people who give us Medicare and Medicaid, reform should be done using vouchers. That's exactly what Terrence was talking about, to states. when this country was set up, the federal government, the biggest fear of the founders was that the federal government was going to get too big. This was the biggest challenge when they formed the Union. They were terrified that the federal government was going to become just like the king was, and that all of the power was going to be in the executive branch. Guess what's happening right now? King Obama. Okay? So we need to return the power back to the states because they're the ones that are going to be able to make decisions. And if you don't like what your state is doing with the money, then you can move to another state. This is what the founders said. This is what states had different religions when the Union was first formed. But if you didn't like the religion that was in the first state, this is under the first Congressional Congress, you can always move to another state. So this is what happens when you have it at the federal level and you just can't. Where are you going to go? Mexico? So the next is the military overreach, the Department of Defense, and the VA system. Now nobody said we shouldn't help out the vets, and nobody's saying that we don't need to defend our country. But there's a point where, when you're spending $5,000 for a toilet and you just have huge amounts of waste, you need to start to pull back. And especially what Taryn says. The United States, we should provide for a common defense, which is what it calls for in the Constitution. But the United States should not be the policeman for the globe. We can't do it. The drug war. There's another big one, the drug war. Remember that back in the 70s? How many billions and billions of dollars have been poured into the drug war? And guess what? It ain't working, folks. We still have it. So, essentially here's an enormous program that failed. But instead of cutting our losses, they continue to spend.
Hey, Nancy Reagan's just say no policy worked better than what they're doing.
There
that
you
didn't
go.
cost us a dime.
I know it. But, government always knows best, according to them. Social Security, okay, it should be phased out as mandatory and go to a voluntary system. Private accounts where people have ownership and they have inheritability. So if you're spending money or you're saving money by putting it into your own Social Security account, when you pass, that can go on to your children. It just doesn't go into a big pot somewhere. So there are ways to privatize Social Security that's going to make it much more effective and more cost-effective for everybody. Okay, these are just an example of some of the areas where we can cut back. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the agencies and government corporations. There are 67 agencies that make up, this is the executive branch, that these do not fall under Congress, the lawmaking branch. They fall under the executive branch. And none of these are supposed to be making laws, but believe me, all they do is make laws and regulations. Just a few of our favorites are Amtrak, the USPS, the SSA, which is the Social Security Administration, SEC, OSHA, NTSB, which is the one that regulates the airline safety, NASA, the FTC, the CIA, the EPA, the FCC, the FDIC, the FTC, the DOC, the DHS, which is our Homeland Security, my favorites who I had a personal, very touching experience with over the weekend, the TSA, the DOJ, the DOS, the Department of the Interior, which is the DOI, the Treasury. I guess they haven't figured out any initials for the Treasury yet. And then the BLM, which is the Bureau of Land Management. And there are more. So when you look at this entire alphabet soup of just waste, and these are people who are regulating our lives to death. And this doesn't happen just at the federal level, it happens everywhere, right down to here in Gardiner. I was at town hall meeting last week, and they actually found some places in Gardiner that weren't where the water hasn't been regulated yet. So when you have all of the federal water regulations, and then you have all of the county, and then you have the Department of Health, which regulates water, and then you've got all of these maps, they're now creating a new aquifer law, an overlay law to the zoning, because they've decided that there are gaps. There are little gaps in Gardiner where the water, they haven't been able to regulate it yet. So they want to fill those gaps just to make sure that we don't get away with anything.
And the overlay is the entire town border.
It's more zoning laws, people, so that you know what you can't do with your own property. So what we really need to do is focus back on the red tape and the Obama overregulation epidemic.